Did you or someone you know have an imaginary friend, and was it actually imaginary? The story that I'm about to translate for you guys comes from the memories of this guy named Tony. And I do say his memories because he explains that as he got older, he doesn't remember certain details, but what he does remember is crazy. Tony says that when he was a kid, he had this imaginary friend that would come out of this armoire that he had in his bedroom. Tony remembers that his imaginary friend was really calm and he would always tell him a lot of stories. He doesn't necessarily remember what stories, but he does remember that his imaginary friend would tell him a lot of stories. That's all he would do. Now, Tony's dad was always traveling for work, but on one of the occasions where he was home, Tony decided to tell his dad about his imaginary friend. He obviously tells him that his friend comes out of the armoire, that he tells him a lot of stories. Tony explains that his dad looked very serious and he asked him, "What is your imaginary friend's name?" Now, as an adult retelling the story, Tony says that he doesn't remember the exact name of the imaginary friend, but he remembers that he told his dad it was either like Peter or Patrick. Now, one of the details that Tony does remember is that after telling his dad, my imaginary friend's name is either Peter or Patrick, his face went very pale. Tony explains that the next day he remembers that his dad and his uncle took that armoire out of his bedroom, took it out to the yard, and they burned it. Tony has no idea why his dad and uncle took the armoire and burned it, but what he does remember is that he never saw his imaginary friend again. It wasn't until years later, where he's already an adult, where he found out why they did this. He found out that this armoire had been passed down from generation to generation. It had belonged to the grandparents before he ended up with it. And when it was in his grandparents' home, it was in his uncle's bedroom, who also saw the imaginary friend coming out of the armoire and telling him stories as well. And as you can imagine, the reason why the dad asked for the name was because it was the same name that his brother would tell the parents when it was happening to him. Now, the reason why the dad and the uncle burned down the armoire was because when the uncle was young and this imaginary friend started to, come out of the armoire telling him stories, that was just the beginning. In other words, this imaginary friend started off really innocent, being nice and calm and telling him stories. But obviously, as time went on, his uncle was having a lot of trouble going to sleep. He started to have night terrors, and it was all because of this imaginary friend. He explains that when this was happening to his uncle when he was younger, the grandparents didn't take it too seriously, but what they did do was just remove the armoire and put it somewhere else in the house. Now, it did take a long time for his uncle as a kid to come back to normal, because they explained that he wasn't that innocent small kid that he was before this imaginary friend came into the picture. And obviously, this was the reason why Tony's dad was so scared when Tony was telling him about his imaginary friend, because he didn't want his son to end up the same way that his brother did. When they started asking around about this armoire and who it belonged to before it was their grandparents, they found out that it belonged to one of the uncles and that apparently he was into really weird things. Tony does describe what the imaginary friend looked like, and he said that he looked like a normal little old man. He was really short and that his fingers were really long. Tony also explains that he knew when his imaginary friend was there because he almost smelled like moldy, like something that had been put away for years and years. Also, the way that they got this armoire was because the house that they were living in did belong to the grandparents, but after his dad and uncle got older, they moved away, and it was only until Tony's dad got married with his mom that they decided to move back into the house, and he ended up in the room where this armoire had been staying at the entire time. Obviously, when they saw the armoire, they didn't think it was anything bad. They just thought, oh, that was a good decoration for Tony's bedroom, not thinking that the story was going to repeat itself after 30 years. Also, another detail, the uncle didn't live in the same area. He lived far away, and he had only came back to that house to burn down that armoire. Tony says that his uncle does remember more of those details having to deal with that imaginary friend. Tony explains that till this day, his uncle does have trouble falling asleep at night, and this is all thanks to this imaginary friend. What do you guys think?
I read the story of this guy who rented a cabin out in the Ozarks. Planned to be there for a long weekend, and there's nothing unusual about that. People, like myself, like to go out there and have a relaxing time and just kind of be with nature, right? Very normal. The Ozarks are definitely a mountain range that you would want to go to if you want to disengage from technology and just be one with nature. If you've never seen the Ozarks, it's hard to explain just how isolated parts of these mountain ranges are, or this area, just the whole area in general. The Ozarks literally feel so mysterious, like a fucking place where it's just been watching people come and go for centuries and generations and generations and generations and just watching us. I don't know, I feel like it's a feeling that you know when you felt it. Okay, so anyways, back to the story. The guy, like, he was out there in his cabin, and one day he woke up and he was gonna go for a hike. So he straps on his GoPro and he's out going for a hike. So whatever, he's going about his day. He's literally hiking, having a good time, looking at all the scenery, having a great old time. And he finds something that he's not expecting to find all the way out in the middle of nowhere, which is an old road. But if you know anything about, like, Missouri and, like, you know, the Ozark Mountains or anything like that, you know that there's, like, old mining towns and stuff like that. So whatever, he went exploring down this road. He was like, fuck yeah, I'm gonna follow this road. Bro found himself walking on this overgrown road for hours, bro. Honestly, I would have given up because I'd be like, oh, I'm scared. Where's this going? Eventually, he gets to the end of this road where it opens up to a clearing. He walks through the clearing and he realizes that the edge of the clearing is actually the edge of a massive cliff, like a plateau. When he looks down, he sees this valley. And in that valley, he sees an entire ghost town. But the ghost town was not quite a ghost town because he also noticed that there was smoke coming out of the chimneys of the houses down there. That's when he started to panic because abandoned towns don't cook dinner, bro. So he checks the map that he has and he's like, there's no town on this map. So curiosity got the better of him, and I don't know, I would have got the fuck out of there, but he went down towards the valley. As he gets down there, he notices that nothing there at all is abandoned. It's thriving. There's people in every building. They all notice him right away, that he's an outsider in their community. They're like, what the fuck is this? He starts noticing all of them staring directly at him. Suddenly this girl approaches him, right? Or this woman approaches him, and she's like, just completely astonished that he even found them, because she was like, nobody ever finds us. Of course, she said this in like broken English, you know what I mean? Guy said that she wasn't saying it very angrily or anything like that, just very monotone, like, yo, nobody ever finds us. What are you doing here, basically? Like, the fuck? So he doesn't really know what to say. He doesn't say anything, and he just turns around and leaves. They let him leave with no problems. They weren't a violent bunch of people, I guess, but maybe they could have been, and she was the leader. Honestly, we have no idea. Regardless, they let him get the fuck out of there and go and tell the story of this small town in the middle of the Ozarks. Honestly, it's so big and vast that it doesn't strike me as something that wouldn't be. You know, the Ozark Mountains as well as Appalachia are absolutely no places to mess with. There are people out there, there are things out there, there are beings out there that we have no idea. We have no fucking idea what we're getting into when we go out there.
Have your GPS ever brought you guys to like a really creepy route on your way home, and it makes you literally regret every decision you ever made in your life? Because I have, and today I'm going to tell you guys a horror story about that. So basically, right, I was coming home from my homegirl's house. It was 4 a.m. Why it's 4 a.m? It's beyond me. Okay, I don't make the best decisions. But anyways, it was 4 a.m. and I was like super tired. Usually, right, I would kind of know how to go home from her house at Punggol to Yishun. Yes, I'm a Yishun girl. But right, that day I just didn't feel like using my brain, because like honestly, like I haven't been to her house like in quite a while, and I wasn't fully confident, and again it was 4 a.m. I just wanted to go home as fast as possible. I used Google Maps to actually press home and then like try to go home lah. So then right, usually what happens is Google Maps will take me from basically you'll go like TPE, SLE, like this long bridge down, and then like eventually I'll reach home, that kind lah. But for some reason, right, that day, Google decide, you know what? Let's not think about like, you know, how many cars are on the road right now. Let's go for a creepier route. And you know where they brought me? Seletar. And honestly, like, Seletar daytime, right, is super chill, it's super peaceful and all that. But at night, right, bruh, when I tell you, I was literally the only car on the road, right? I wasn't kidding. And when I was on the road, right, driving straight, you know, like there's this 2-lane road. If you drive, you will know lah. But there's this 2-lane road that goes like around the Seletar, the Yishun Dam area, right? And then there's nobody there one. It's basically like where a lot of like construction is being done, all that stuff lah. So when I was there, right, I was driving, and then suddenly I blinked. Like, I genuinely, it felt like I blinked and then it happened. So I blinked already, right? I opened my eyes. Immediately there was a girl. Okay, this is the car. this is the girl. Immediately I just ran through her, and bro, I tell you, genuinely speaking, right, I thought my life was over. I thought like I'm gonna go to jail for running over a girl just because I was blinking, or maybe like I was blinking too long. But okay, the main issue was, right, when I so-called hit her, her whole body like went through like into the car, right, and she brushed me over here, which freaked me out lah, and I swerved. And after I swerved, right, I came out of the car. I don't know why I came out, okay, like genuinely I thought I really killed someone. So I came out of the car in a panic, and I saw nobody at all. Cool. Look at the car, no hits, no nothing. Cool. Okay, go home. So I was already like, you know, quite shaken and very awake by that time. When I was trying to drive back, right, I wanted to play some music. My phone, for whatever reason, right, the Apple Play could not play. Cool. Okay, never mind. The next thing I know is like, okay, I was thinking, play some like radio ah. Clicked on the radio. Every single station, nada. Not a single sound. It was like just static all the way. I was like out of my mind already. I was like, yeah, I cannot live like this. So I speed up a bit and I started praying. And once I reached the Yishun Dam, right, you know, like where there's those industrial buildings, those expensive industrial buildings like the airbase kind, right? Then after that, you go straight, then it's like the Yishun Dam. Then after that, it's like all the whatever's like houses and all that shit already, right? Then the music started playing, and I was genuinely like, wow, like when I'm telling you guys, right, my hair is standing on. The whole time I was thinking, oh my god. So obviously, because I like to tell you guys horror content, right? So I went to check the CCTV footage in the car. Blank. The whole thing was blank. There's nothing inside. And I was like, cool bro, cool. And then the next few days, right, my homegirl, she was like, hey, you wanna hang out or not? And I was like, okay. So I drove to pick her up. It was daytime, and I made a cautious effort, right, to see whether like going through that same route, whether there was like any static, or like will there be any music or anything. I just wanted to see what's going on. But the music was fine, the radio was fine. Obviously my Apple Play was fine because it doesn't have any effect now. But the radio was playing, everything was okay. It's just a very eerie experience lah. And I don't know if you guys experienced something like that before, but if you have, right, just, you know, can you tell me so that I don't feel so alone? Because like, wow, that was creepy as shit, bro. Wouldn't wish that on anyone. But yeah, honestly, it's been a while since something that actually shook me happened. So like, I think I was quite shaken up by it lah. But anyways, like, subscribe, comment, tell me if you guys experience something like this in Seletar or like any other places, so that I know not to go there. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
My Merlin app picked up something that definitely wasn't a bird. It was the voice of my dead sister. I'm freaked out and I don't know what to do. If you've not heard of it, Merlin is like Shazam for birds. Record the tweeting around you and it'll tell you what it is. You'll mostly get the standard ones, blackbirds, robins, blue tits. But then, sometimes, a rare bird comes through and it shows up with a little red dot. It's addictive. You start to notice patterns. It's genuinely a thrill when that happens. I once heard a black redstart on my walk home from work through the streets of London, and it made my year. Some people think it's sad, but I love it. I've needed the distraction. That sounded like a mother bird vomiting into her child's mouth. I needed the distraction, and it's helped me so much to clear my head since my big sister passed away a few years back. Kathy. Well, Kath to me. She's always called me Boggy, even though my full name is Bernard. I'm more a video games online guy. I'll be real, I'm a nerd. And that's okay. I see it as a superpower sometimes. I see patterns where other people don't. Socially, I'm a bit useless, and I was in awe of Kath and how she would chat to literally anyone. She was the one who told me about Merlin. If you like catching Pokemon, Bog, you're going to love this. Her murder was a huge shock, and my family haven't a clue how to heal from it. We already weren't the type to discuss our feelings, and even less so now. It's just me and Mum and Dad and our memories of Kath. She went missing in Devon in 2023 while I was in my last year of uni. She was volunteering for a rewilding project and was seemingly having the time of her life. She'd send the family WhatsApp photos of herons, storks, ravens, starling murmurations. She seemed so happy. She even told us there was a local raven who seemingly followed her most days, dropping little gifts for her by the lodge. She called him Rowan. She found a bit of paradise, and even though we missed her, we were happy for her. But one day, radio silence. Kath had been out on a ringing mission. Mist netting, they called it. Her and another volunteer called Matthew, and she never returned. Matthew said they'd finished up earlier than expected, and she said that she wanted to go for a run, and she just sprinted off into the distance. A scrunchie and a backpack of hers was found, traces of blood, a clump of hair too.
Oh, God.
Her phone was missing though. Police believed she'd come to harm, but a body was never found. The search effort was incredible. Matthew was questioned, but there was no DNA apart from Kathy's to suggest he'd been in any way responsible. The authorities declared in the end that she'd taken her own life. But I call it murder because I know differently. Kath was the happiest she'd ever been. She confided in me that she was seeing someone from the Wader ringing group. I'm pretty sure it's Matthew, though she never said who it was to me. He denied that they knew each other that well at all. The first Saturday of every month, I make it my mission to go to the place that Kathy ran away and disappeared. And I stay for a few days and I just walk and I listen. And that's where this story gets really strange. Every Saturday, I see a raven. He hops in front of me, flies forward to branches ahead of me, cawing. I salute to him sometimes. My stomach churns at the thought of someone seeing me do that, but for some reason, I feel like it's important. And I like to think that this is Rowan, the raven that Kath used to see all the time. But I'm probably being stupid. This Saturday just gone, I started out early. There's a cold breeze, hazy morning sun. The dawn chorus is settling down and I feel at peace. I glance at my phone to see what I found. Merlin says it's captured all sorts, a few birds I've never heard of, and I save the recording. I pull out my flask of coffee and I perch on a log nearby to take in the view. Over the valley, I see the line of trees stretching out into ancient woodland. And then I see it. A flash of pink. A girl. Running. Jogging. Yellow tank top. Brown hair. Long ponytail. My heart leaps. It's Kathy. I'm sure of it. She stops and she looks up at me and she waves. And then mouths something I can't make out, and then she sprints into the woods. The raven flies off in the same direction and my heart is hammering. I can't believe what I'm seeing and I realise I'm crying. It was just a jogger, making the most of a peaceful morning, kindly waving to the kid on the hill. Of course, my mind played a neat trick on me. This happens a lot. I think I see Kathy all the time when I'm here, waving at me, trying to get my attention, but when I look closer, it's just someone I don't know, talking to another someone I don't know. I decide to finish up my coffee and my walk, and I go and have a nap in my room at the B&B. Before I doze off, I decide my Merlin recording will cheer me up. I want to listen to the carefree sing-song of the birds I heard this morning. They calm me down, and I know my breathing will regulate, and I'll likely be asleep in minutes. Here's the recording. Oh. It's her voice. I know it is. She said my name. She's the only one who calls me that. Boggy. My heart soars.
Oh, yeah.
I'm convinced I'm going to find her. Kath, somewhere in the woods of Devon. She waved to me. It was her. The next day, I wake up for sunrise. I start off on the trail that leads to the woods where I saw the jogger waving, where I saw Kath waving. It's private land, but I go over the fence anyway. The dawn chorus chirrups and echoes around me, and I go further and further in, intuition guiding me. For some reason, I know I'm going to see the raven again. Sure enough, I do. After what feels like hours, I hear the unmistakable call. He's holding something in his mouth. It's muddy, but I see a golden glint as it reflects the morning sunshine. It's tiny. An earring. I stand still and scrunch my eyes. The raven flies from his branch and drops it at my feet. I don't know why, but I open up Merlin and I say, Kath, I'm here and I'm listening. And I start to record, and this is what I got. I hear that, and I know I'm close. Rowan drops the earring at my feet. Those intelligent eyes stare at me, regarding me, waiting. He hops backwards, and I walk towards him. He hops back again. He wants me to follow him. The woods are dense now. I'm climbing and pushing branches and brambles aside. Rowan flies to a nearby tree and flutters his wings, and he's stopped. I scan the area. For the first time this weekend, I feel true fear. I sense what's going to happen. I know I'm going to find Kath. And there it is. A shock of white skin, the tank top, the matted, bloodied brown hair. She lies there at the base of a tree, covered in dead leaves and mud and twigs. The wind gusts around me, and I hear Rowan fly off towards the canopy of trees and away. I can't explain what happened that weekend. Obviously, I notified police. Her body was finally laid to rest, as she wanted. Her phone was found nearby too. Texts from Matthew. Angry texts, threats. If Kathy told his wife the truth, she'd pay, and so on. He was arrested, and our family could finally grieve. My Merlin recordings, I've kept those to myself. I think they break my parents' heart. And you want to know the last strange part of my tale? A year or so later, we came back to Devon. We came to the project. It was a sunny morning, and we went to spread Kath's ashes. It was a beautiful sunny day. There was no one about. We said a final goodbye, and just as we made to leave, I heard a familiar call, and I felt those intelligent eyes looking at me from a bower above. Rowan. I saluted him, and we made our way home. The end.
What would you do if your coworkers remembered having a conversation with you the night before, but you were home alone the entire time? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a break room, some security footage, and something that looked enough like her to get inside. This happened when I was working in a medical billing office a couple years ago. Nothing about that job was creepy. It was boring in the most normal way possible, with beige walls, fluorescent lights, stale coffee, everybody pretending not to hate each other until Friday. We had one later shift rotation, so every once in a while I'd stay until around 11, finishing end-of-day reports while the rest of the building emptied out. And one Thursday, I left right at 9:30. I remember that clearly because I stopped for gas on the way home, I got Taco Bell, and I watched 2 episodes of a terrible show in bed, and fell asleep with the TV on. I was alone all night. No one came over, and I didn't leave again. Nothing unusual happened. But the next morning I walked into work, and one of the women from collections looked at me, laughed, and said, "You seem more awake today." I asked what she meant, and she said, "You were acting weird last night." I thought she was joking. And then another coworker overheard and said, "Yeah, you really don't remember all that?" That was the first second I felt that cold, sinking feeling. Because they weren't laughing like they were pranking me. They were talking the way people do when they think you're embarrassed and trying to play it off. I asked them exactly what I had supposedly done, and one of them said I came back into the break room after most people had left and just stood there while they were finishing paperwork. Another said I barely blinked the whole time. And then the first woman said, "You kept asking who usually stays latest." I laughed once, but it came out wrong. I said I wasn't here. I went home hours earlier. And they all kind of looked at each other after that. And then one of them said quieter, "Then who was standing in the break room with us?" At that point, I was still trying to force it into something stupid. Misremembering, or somebody that looked like me from behind. One of those little office misunderstandings that get bigger the more people repeat it. And then my manager called me into her office. She shut the door and asked if everything was okay. And that made it worse immediately. I asked her what they had told her, and she said multiple people had seen me in the break room around 11:15, and one of them was unsettled enough to mention it because I wasn't acting like myself. I told her I had been home since then before 10. I told her I had been home since before 10 o'clock, and she stared at me for a second and then said, "Do you want to see the footage?" I wish I had said no, and she pulled up the security camera feed from the break room. It was grainy, black and white, the usual bad office camera angle from high in the corner near the ceiling. You could see the vending machines and the coffee maker, the little table, and part of the hallway outside. At first, it was exactly what you'd expect. 2 of my coworkers in there talking while one packed up her bag. And then at 11:43, somebody walked into frame from the hallway. It looked like me. Same height and hair and coat I had worn that day. Even the way I held my shoulders looked right at first glance. Then the room went cold around me. I was standing there watching something shaped like me enter my work break room almost 2 hours after I had gone home. One of the women in the footage turned and said something to it, and the thing nodded once, and then it just stood there. That was the part that made my manager pause the video. She pointed and said, "See?" It wasn't standing like a person trying to talk. It wasn't fidgeting or checking a phone or adjusting its bag, not doing anything normal people do when they stop moving. It was just still, too still. And one of the women laughed and said something else to it. And then the thing that looked like me slowly turned its head toward her. Even through the bad footage, I could tell the face was wrong. Not wildly wrong, but just enough. The eyes looked a little too small, and the mouth looked slightly too wide, like something had studied me and gotten impatient near the end. I actually said, "Stop," out loud, and my manager paused the footage again. And then she looked at me and said very carefully, "That's not you?" I said no, and I think she believed me, but not in the way I wanted. We watched the rest anyway, and one coworker in the video asked it something. It answered. No audio on the security footage, obviously, but you could see the mouth move. Then one of the women gave this awkward little laugh and picked up her bag like she was getting uncomfortable. The thing stayed there for another few seconds, and then it turned and walked out of frame. Not back towards the exit, toward the hallway that led to my office. And that made every hair on my arm stand up because my office door automatically locks when the system arms for the night. There should not have been anyone in there. I went straight to my desk after that. Nothing looked disturbed at first. The monitor was off, the chair was tucked in, everything was exactly how I had left it. Then I noticed one sticky note placed exactly in the center of my keyboard. In my handwriting were the words, "You should leave earlier." I don't remember breathing for a second. My manager kept asking if I was okay, but I could barely hear her over the sound of my own pulse. I knew I had not written it. I knew that, but it was my handwriting, and not close, it was exactly mine. I left early that day. Actually, I left permanently 2 weeks later. Officially, I blamed burnout, stress, long hours, all of which were true enough that nobody pushed me. But unofficially, I couldn't stay in the building where something that looked almost like me knew where my office was. Before I quit, I made my manager let me watch the footage one more time. I wanted to know one more thing. I wanted to know whether the thing that had looked towards the camera at any point, or only at the woman in the room. And it did. Right before it left the break room, it turned its face slightly upward. And then even though the terrible angle and bad resolution, I could tell it was smiling. Not big, but just enough. Like it knew someone would eventually be watching it back. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
The person that sent me the story called it the mimic my whole family experiences. By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our community about glitches in the Matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. Hi, Anti-Matrix and community. Hi! Oh my God, I love your stories. I've watched every single one for years and it was always so sad nothing strange and cool ever happened to me until now. Now I don't think it's so cool. Oh my God, what happened? My husband and I purchased our home over 2 years ago and moved into it midsummer. The house is connected to another house on one side, as was our previous rental. We looked for a long time to get what we wanted and saw so many houses, and at our first viewing, this house felt so peaceful and so lovely. Lots of light, a huge bedroom for us, and our son's room doubled in size from our last house. We have 2 wiener dogs and they have the biggest backyard to run around in. We had found our dream home. When we signed the papers, I even made a joke to my husband that I was going to ask our realtor, who was a family friend, if the house was haunted. He begged me not to. Our son is 6 and has slept in his own bed, previously crib, in his own room since he was 4 months of age. No issues at our prior house, and within the first week after moving in here, he refused to go to sleep. He was always scared at bedtime. I'll admit after moving, I had an uncomfortable feeling in the house too, but I don't do change well. At first, I assumed this was fear of the unknown because we changed our environment to a new home and he was attending a new school in the fall and a lot of changes for a little guy. We brushed this off initially because we figured as he got more comfortable with the change, things would go back to normal. To this day, he does not want to be in his room alone. Even during the day, he has us come up to his room with him so he can play with his toys that he keeps upstairs. To get him to sleep, we have to read to him, practice happy thoughts or other strategies, and lay down with him until he falls asleep. He often runs in our room and wakes us up in the middle of the night, sometimes up to 5 times a night, and we have to take him back to his room and start the process over again to get him to sleep. We have on several occasions asked him what he is so scared of, and most of the time he can't explain it to us. For a long time, we assumed he was just having bad dreams. About 1.5 years after moving in, I was laying down with him in bed before going to sleep, and he kept saying, "I'm scared," and repeating himself. Once again, I reminded him it's okay to feel scared, but maybe we should practice some coping skills I have been teaching him to get his mind off of it. He said no, he wanted to talk about it. He explained that he doesn't like the kids that live in his closet. What? I was not expecting that. He said he can always hear them in there making noise and talking, and they always make him feel scared that he is going to die and that he doesn't want to die. After a while, I got him to fall asleep, but at the same time, I froze in fear because I am a believer in paranormal activity. As a teenager, my boyfriend at the time lived in a haunted house, and I experienced a lot of my belongings moving around and heard doors and cupboards, etc. opening and closing all the time, but never physically saw anything. My son's closet is connected through a wall to our upstairs bathroom, so it couldn't be the neighbors that he is hearing. I don't know how his closet is insulated, but every time I open it, I notice it's always colder than the rest of his room, even in the summer. I told my husband, but he brushed it off. First of all, it could very well be that it is just colder because it's a closet and closets are not normally insulated the same, but it could also be colder because there are ghosts in there. And second of all, can we stop brushing our kids off? Since that conversation, my son has not brought up the children in his closet again. So after a few weeks passed, we just assumed that that was a dream that he had, and it must have felt so real that he thought it was happening and didn't know that he was dreaming. Fast forward to about a month ago. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner and my son was watching TV in the living room, which he always does while I prepare meals. There's a wall separating the kitchen and the living room, and when you pass the wall, there is an opening to the kitchen with a window in the kitchen facing the backyard and a door to the yard just past the kitchen opening. My husband was still at work. My son came into the kitchen while I was cooking 3 times and said, "What?" like I had called him to come over to me. Each time I said to him, I didn't say anything, and each time he came into the kitchen more irritated. The last time telling me to stop it, "It's your voice, I know you're calling me." Our family likes to play silly pranks on each other, so he thought I was calling him and just pranking him and trying to annoy him. This really freaked me out though, because he was so certain it was me calling him and specifically said that it was my voice. I let him believe I was just pranking him. I didn't hear anything, so what could it have been? I didn't tell anybody about this, especially my husband, because he doesn't believe in these things and always feels that there's a logical explanation. The logical explanation is that you have a mimic in your house. The following week, we're home alone again. My husband was on his way home from work and I was in the kitchen cooking, so my son was watching TV as usual. We have a basketball hoop in our backyard we just bought him recently that we can see from the kitchen window, and he likes to go out and play when we're in the kitchen cooking and cleaning, if we're busy and not able to be outside with him. The rule is that he has to tell us when he goes outside to play so that we can watch him from the window. Kids are forgetful, and he often gets his shoes on and goes out and doesn't tell us, so we have had a lot of conversations lately about safety and the importance of him telling us when he goes outside. We can always hear the door close from the kitchen, especially because he's young and he's careless and he slams every door closed. This night, I was standing at the stove beside the kitchen window. My body was sideways to the opening of the kitchen. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him walk past the kitchen to the back door and heard the door quickly open and slam shut. Ready to get him in trouble for not telling me he was going outside and remind him of the rule, I walked quickly out to the kitchen to the back door and opened it. He was not outside. I walked through the gate to the front of the house because I thought maybe he went out to the gate, but he wasn't there either. Confused and panicked because I couldn't see him anywhere, I ran toward the front door to get my phone and call my husband while I was calling my son's name over and over. When I got in the house, he was sitting on the couch watching TV. He said, "What's wrong?" and gave me a weird look because I was acting so panicked. I asked him if he just went outside and he said, no, he had just been sitting on the couch waiting for dinner. Logically, when I saw whatever it was and heard the door close, I was just a few steps behind. If it was him, he would have been right there when I opened the door. I'm telling you, this was him, wearing the same clothes he was wearing that day, and I saw his blonde hair, the side of his face, and the back of his head. I didn't tell my husband or anyone else. A couple of weeks or so later, I had an upset stomach in the evening, so I made my son something quick to eat for dinner. And when my husband got home, I went to rest upstairs while my husband made himself dinner. About 15 minutes after I went upstairs, I got a text from him saying, "Oh my God, I'm in the kitchen and I swore I saw Arlo walk by to the back door. And when I looked, he wasn't there and is laying on the couch playing his Switch. I'm freaked the fuck out. Thank God the non-believer finally saw something." I read this and again was crippled with fear and felt frozen. After a few minutes, I got the courage to run down and be with them so that I wasn't alone upstairs. I told my husband that had just happened to me. I am burning sage this weekend while setting some good intentions. Even as a skeptic, my husband agreed that this was a good idea. What is happening in my house? Is there a visible spirit we are seeing? Is it a mimic and it's showing his physical form but calling out to him in my voice? Why are my dogs having no reaction to anything happening? They're a yappy breed and they bark at everything. Do they hear noises in the house but assume it's one of us? Something is here. My husband and I have both seen it and my son heard it. Let me know what you think, and if you have more tips and tricks to better cleanse my house than using sage and good intentions. I am so freaked out. The end. I mean, this definitely sounds like a mimic. I wouldn't say that it's a spirit that you're seeing because the spirit looks like your son, and then your son is hearing your voice. That normally would say mimic to me. A mimic can mimic multiple people. It doesn't have to be just mimicking one person in the house. I don't know why your dogs are not having a reaction. Like, that's kind of weird because normally our animals know, right? Make sure you're using your words. You're telling it to get the fuck out of your house. Also, I would use some Palo Santo as well. You can also try some sound cleansing with like bells. There's definitely some like sound cleansing things on YouTube you could probably look up. But number one is absolute to stand your ground and tell them that this is your house and they need to leave. But hold on, can we go back to your son seeing children in the closet? Because that's freaking me the fuck out. Was he seeing? Oh, he wasn't seeing, he was just hearing, right? He was hearing them in the closet. Do we think there's like two different things going on? Are there like some little child spirits hanging out in the closet, but then there's also a mimic? Or do we think that the mimic is mimicking little child voices in the closet and then also other things? I don't know. It's all really scary though. Let me know what you guys think in the comments if you have any tips in the comments, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
I did a binding love spell on my boyfriend so he wouldn't leave me, but now that I did, I'm worried that I made a deal with something I don't quite understand and I am terrified. This submission to Spooky Scary Storytime came from someone named Shay. Her name has been changed, but Shay says that at the time that she did this spell, she was in her early 20s and she and her boyfriend had a very rocky relationship. They had a child together. Shay also had a child from a previous relationship who was a little bit older, and her boyfriend's family didn't like this. They didn't think that he should be settling down with Shay, especially at such a young age, and so they would constantly encourage him to go out, to leave her, be a good father, but to not tie himself down. And so as a result, he broke up with her a lot. He told her that he needed to go and live his life and that he was too young to be tied down. And this, of course, broke her heart. And they were constantly breaking up and getting back together, and she just lived in this perpetual state of fear and anxiety that the relationship would finally end. One day, Shay's boyfriend was out. He had broken up with her for like the 100th time. He wasn't staying at their apartment and he was staying with family because he just said that he wasn't ready to settle down. And Shay was devastated, as she always was. And so she called her sister to come over and keep her company. And she just wanted someone to sort of vent to. And so her sister, who I'll call Sadie for the story, arrives over at the house and she's listening to her and she says, "Well, I know how to do a love binding spell." Says, I'm actually getting ready to do it on my own boyfriend because Sadie's boyfriend was moving across the country to Utah, and Sadie was worried that once he moved, he wouldn't want to do long distance and would ultimately break up with her. And Shay says that Sadie had always been into spell work and the occult. I'm not sure what she practiced exactly, but she was familiar with this type of thing, I suppose. Shay says that spell work wasn't really her thing, but in her moment of desperation, she just asked Sadie, like, okay, well, what is a love binding spell and how does it work exactly? He tells her, well, it basically just makes it impossible for them to leave you. Even if his family says that he shouldn't be tied down, he won't listen. He'll love you ultimately forever. He goes, if you want, I can show you how to do it and we can do it together. And Shay says that she was reluctant at first, but willing to try anything to keep her man. I'm going to tell you how she did it, but I will say that I don't think that anybody should be messing with things like this. But just for the sake of storytelling's sake, she said that Sadie instructed her to print off a photo of her boyfriend. Sadie did the same with a photo of her own boyfriend, and on the back of these photos, they wrote the following: I bind you, the boyfriend's name, to me, their own names, life and forever. You will see no interest in anyone else but me until the day you die. She says they then rolled up the photos, took strands of their own hair, and wrapped their own hair around the photo again and again until it was bound. While they did this, they repeated the words that they had written over and over again, and afterward, they sat there for several hours repeating that phrase. She says after a while it felt like a meditation, and she remembers feeling like she was almost in a trance-like state as she said the words and felt them in every fiber of her being. After doing this, they each took a candle, lit it, and then let the candle wax drip over the edges of the rolled up photograph so that it was completely sealed and the words that they had written could not escape. Then went outside and dug 2 separate holes where they buried the photos and repeated the iteration that they had written one final time. She says she remembers feeling satisfied when it was all said and done, and she wasn't sure if it would work, but she felt like something had changed. And a few days later, her boyfriend showed back up at the apartment, and from there, he never left. He told her how much he loved her, he told her how sorry he was for treating her the way that he had, and he would even get into arguments with his own family anytime they suggested that he shouldn't be tied down to her. Months passed, and Shay says he didn't even leave the house to go hang out with his friends. He only left when he went to work, and she remembers feeling very relieved and thankful and like things had finally turned a corner. Then Shay says she had a dream, or maybe an episode of sleep paralysis, that made her believe that she had made a bargain with some kind of entity that she didn't really know that she was working with. She had fallen asleep with her boyfriend one night, and she woke up at some point in the night to what felt like a presence in the corner of the room. And she immediately tried to turn to see what it was, but she found herself unable to move and unable to speak. All she could move was her eyes, and she glanced at the corner of the room to see a dark shadow figure standing there with a goat head and horns, and it began to move across the room toward her side of the bed. She couldn't struggle or scream, and as she locked eyes with this entity, she said she couldn't even blink. It finally reached her, but stopped just next to her head, and then it began to speak to her, but telepathically, and it told her that she belonged to him now. It said, I will come for you when I am ready. It began to whisper to her in different voices and in different languages, things that she couldn't understand, until she was finally able to struggle enough to wake herself up. She was able to finally open her eyes from this horrible nightmare. She found herself in the same position in the bed, facing her boyfriend, and he was even awake at this point and asked her what was wrong, and she started screaming at him, why didn't you wake me up? Why didn't you wake up? She started detailing the nightmare to him, and he told her, you were just having a bad dream, but she says deep in her heart of hearts, she knew that this was something more. That day, Shay says she called her sister and told her about the dream, and her sister just nonchalantly said, yeah, I get those dreams all the time. You'll get used to it. Shay was so frightened by this dream that she couldn't fall asleep for an entire 2 nights afterward. And Shay said that it has been 18 years since she made this deal, but she truly believes that she sold at least a part of her soul. Her boyfriend never left. They went on to have another child, and he takes amazing care of the family. But she says she still feels like there is some debt that is unpaid. And she's been thinking about it a lot lately, especially because 2 years ago, her sister, who was 33, died of a massive heart attack. She says she was incredibly active, she had no history of illness, and though it sounds crazy, she wonders if she died of natural causes or if the thing that she saw, finally came to collect. Even stranger, she says, since her sister has passed, she will get auditory hallucinations of a man's voice telling her that he loves her. It's always while she's alone. And she says, I know that it sounds crazy and I shouldn't think this way, but I can't help but wonder, did I sell my soul? Did something take my sister? She ended her message by saying, if anyone made it this far and did hear my story out, all I want to know is, how do I break what I did? Her name has been changed, but she will be seeing the comments. If you have a spooky, scary story time of your own, about something that still leaves you unsettled, please send it in. We would love to hear it.
Fun fact about me is that I collect haunted dolls. This is Luciella. I got her from my grandmother's doll collection when she passed away. I have 3 that are from her collection, and that's the only 3 that I have, so I'm a relatively new collector, but this is Luciella. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about her and like the history behind her. Close up. She's very pretty. She's porcelain. She's got beautiful little curls. She was made between 1970 and 1985. So Luciella is actually very well known throughout my family. My grandmother always used to tell us kids never to move her after sunset. So she's not like the oldest doll in the collection that she has. She wasn't even the rarest one, but she was the one that my grandmother had placed in the center of her doll room, looking out the door. And by that I mean like facing the bedroom door, like kind of on guard, if that makes sense. Every single other doll in that room looked inward towards Luciella, while Luciella looked straight outside the bedroom door. And I remember when I was 10 years old, I asked my grandmother why she had this placement for these dolls. And I remember her getting real quiet at first, and then she told me a story. She said that she got Luciella from a state fair in the late 1970s. It was somewhere out in like rural Vermont where we kind of lived. She said that the owner of this house was a widow and lived all by herself. But when that woman passed away, the neighbors entered the house to like clear it out because apparently she didn't have any family members to pass down her things to or do those things for her, so her neighbors stepped in to help after she passed away. And they noticed something strange. Every single clock was set to 3:17. Even the clocks that ran on like different mechanisms, if I can speak English, you know, like the wind-up clocks versus the regular clocks. What I'm trying to say is every single clock in the house was set to 3:17, and that was strange in itself. And apparently sitting in the chair next to the woman's bed was Miss Luciella. She was perfectly clean, not a speck of dust was on her, not a little wrinkle in her hair, unfortunately, as she does now. So the estate company sold most of the furniture that was in the house, but nobody wanted to take Luciella. Workers would claim that her eyes would be different every single time that they entered the room, which I can attest that her eyes do change colors and they do move around. I do catch her looking at different positions. Her head will be like turned, and honestly, sorry Lucy, her head can't turn like very well, but sometimes it'll be like a little bit facing this way, or like just like, you see how you can subtly change things, but she'll change them on her own. There were also some workers that claimed to see her moving, or like to see her like in one position in one time, and then when they check again, she's in a totally different position. This has happened too. So she comes with a stand. She has a stand that she stands straight up in, and she knows how to get herself out of it. She doesn't necessarily like to be in her stand, so I don't like to keep her in it. She feels very confined in it, I feel like. A lot of the workers of that house actually claim to hear like little girl laughter and giggling and like the mischievous kind of laughter of a little kid playing. So then steps in my grandmother at the estate sale, and she purchases Luciella for $5 because she thinks she's going to be great for her addition to her doll room. The woman at the sale practically begged her to take this, and my grandmother was already like, yeah, I'm going to take it anyway. I'm a collector, I love dolls. So for months, nothing happened until one night, my grandfather said that he woke up one night and my grandma was standing in the hallway, just staring straight ahead at him, fucking creepy. And so he asks what's wrong, and she just says, she's singing again. He was like, Viola, who is singing? What are you talking about, Vi? Who is singing? And she slowly pointed towards the doll room and said, Luciella. It's Luciella who's singing. So my grandfather was like, yo, you're delusional. Let's go back to bed, Vi. Like, seriously, no. She was not having it. She was like, Gordon, you need to stop and listen right now. When he did stop and listen, he did in fact hear a child singing and humming in the bedroom. So he ran around the entire house thinking that like he was going to find a child somewhere in the house, or somebody pretending to be a child somewhere in the house. But of course he found nothing, because there was nothing. Once they actually got to the door of the doll room, the humming stopped, and they noticed Luciella was sitting outside of her chair on the floor, staring directly at them. And ever since that day, they started to have more activity in the house. Like, their dogs would refuse to go into certain bedrooms at certain times. They would hear like little scampering of bipedal footsteps running through their house, you know, like little porcelain feet, click, 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 walking through their house. Sometimes they would find family photographs that had fallen off the walls and stuff. So I have yet to like experience any of that here, but to be honest with you, I work at night, so I don't really know what she does at nighttime. So fast forward to a family Thanksgiving event at my grandmother's house, right? My youngest cousin, she started freaking out at the dinner table. She pointed behind like the row of my aunts and uncles who were sitting across from her, and she said, Grammy, who's that child? Like, who's that kid in the white dress? None of the adults saw it, But all of us little kids saw exactly what she was talking about. And that little girl standing there looked exactly like Luciella. Nobody believed us for years and years and years, until one day my grandfather actually saw the same apparition throughout the house. And now she's with me. So yeah, that's the story of Luciella. I have 2 other dolls if you're interested in hearing their backstories and stuff too, because each of them has a weird one. Spooky shit do be happening in my house all the time.
I got a really good glitch story for you from one of my followers named Maria. So this happened to her very recently, and she wrote into me looking for an explanation. What do we think? She has a pair of black knee-high boots that she's owned for a few years that she sees almost every day because they are kept in her shoe cabinet. Okay, so just the other day, when she is in cleaning the shoe cabinet, she finds 2 left boots and a right one. So essentially a pair and an extra left. Now she makes it clear she has only ever owned 1 pair of boots like these. So this is blowing her mind because she knows she only has 1 pair. So she talks to her mom about it, and her mom is trying to justify it and say that maybe you had a second pair all along, or maybe you ordered one and then they accidentally sent a second set. And she's like, I know that is not true. So she goes back for receipts. She's digging back to her Amazon orders, and she confirms that only 1 pair was ever ordered. She also says she would never intentionally buy a second pair of the exact same boots in the same color. She says she is also the only one in the household that would wear boots like this. And if for some weird reason she would have been sent a second pair by accident, she said she would not have kept them. And on top of it, she said that she even moved house a little over a year ago, and she was the only one up in there cleaning out the cabinets and then restocking everything. And she knows for a fact that there was only ever 1 darn pair. She also adds she has a great memory, and she is just going crazy about this. Like, this is really bothering her. I mean, obviously, as it was. And then she goes, and even if there was a second pair, where's the other boot? Where is the other right foot? She says that the more she goes over it in her head, the more freaked out she gets, and she just cannot think of a logical explanation. Okay, so it gets a little deeper. She sends a follow-up email then because she really got thinking deep into this. I posted a story a little while back about a man who says he knows now that he does not exist. And he went on telling this story. You can go back and look into it. It's in the Glitch in the Matrix lineup. Anyway, he talks about how he experienced a glitch. And it was so weird because he almost didn't react the way you think you would. Like, the more he thinks about it, it bothers him. But at first it was almost like too matter of fact, the way his brain just wanted to accept it. Almost like we're made to believe or not really care so much about things like that. And then it makes you question what else is going on around you that is glitchy, that you're just sort of blindly or turning a blind eye to. And Maria said at first she just went back to her normal routine too without thinking much into it. But then the notion of just letting it not bother you so much kind of starts to fester a little bit. And now it's like, wait, why don't I care? And then it's like you're revisiting it in your head. And now it's like, wait a minute. Is this on purpose? She says it's almost like in the moment her brain filed it under unimportant or something. Then she said it wasn't until a few nights later while she was lying in bed, unable to sleep, where it kind of creeped back up in her brain and it really got her thinking. And that's when it really started bothering her. She said that part in that other story I told about the guy who was super unbothered by something that should have been just insane or mind-blowing really resonated with her. She even says in the email, I'm even using voice text right now. It's like my brain doesn't even want me to type it out on my phone. She says, like my entire body doesn't want to, and my fingers just don't want to type it out. As I feel like I'm forcing myself to write this email to tell you about this occurrence. It's like it's trying to take over her feelings about the situation, like some sort of strange false thing coming over her, trying to make her forget. She also says since then she is trying to think back to maybe other times when she has had strange occurrences and just let it go when maybe she shouldn't have. She ends it by saying, hey, maybe there is a logical explanation about it all, but the more she thinks about it, the more unsettled she feels. So side note, I did get back to her and I asked her if she had any photographs of all 3 together. And unfortunately, she said she was so freaked out when it first happened that she just got rid of all 3. And I was like, darn it. But I asked her, were they very similar or were they identical? And she said they were identical. identical. The style, the material, the way that they tied in the back, everything about them was so specific. Even the shape of the heel was very unique. And every single one of these boots was identical, not only in appearance, but also in wear. Like they were all similar, like a little bit dusty. I mean, worn a little bit, but not like one was a brand new one and the others were more worn. They were just like, they were stamped out, except for 2 left, 1 right. I totally believe her. I actually have, I called it my alternate reality leggings. This happened to me. And it happened with a soccer ball from one of my sons. I told that story way a while ago. It's in the Glitch in the Matrix playlist. My friend Sky, this happened to her with a bathing suit, a bikini. Identical pair. She only ever bought one. And she was not the type of person to buy backups or extra. There was nobody else living in the house that would have worn a similar suit. And now she has 2. So awesome. Kind of convenient, although not so much with just 1 extra boot. Where's the other one? All right, guys, drop your thoughts in the comments. I know Maria will be checking them out. And if you ever had a glitch story like that, maybe where a copy of something you already had, you got to share it with me. And if you could, email it to me. The email's in my bio. Send pictures if you can. If you're new here, follow for more. And if you're interested, Creepy Storytime merch is dropped. It's in the link in my bio.
Notes from the exorcism of Sarah Pinocchio. Day 1. Sarah Pinocchio had a weird surname, and she was also possessed by a demon. Her mother had reached out to me after her daughter did the whole 360 head spin, which is usually a fairly sure sign of demonic possession. So, I packed up all my stuff and hustled out to 66.6 Fletcher Street post-haste. She looks a bit pale. Yeah, I noted, staring at the girl. Probably a vitamin deficiency. But she's hovering mid-air, her mother yelled. Yeah, no, valid point. Day 2. An initial test showed signs of a stage 3 demonic possession, and those guys are rare, trust me. So I knew the poor thing would die if I attempted a full-on exorcism, so I chilled out for a bit, read her some Bible verses, occasionally sprinkling her with some holy water. Jesus, compels you, kind of muttered idly. Oh, screw you and your dead grandma, the demon shrieked. That was uncalled for. Day 3. This mother is on my case like a leech to an eyeball, okay? Like, geez, lady, just let me do my job, will ya? I've been doing this for a long time, but Karen over here has seen the movies. The movies. Aren't you supposed to force the demon out? Lady, you do not want to force those lads to do anything. Day 4. The demon is getting frisky. The child is shedding skin like she's a big old anaconda, and the pulsating black veins underneath remind me of chocolate glazed strawberries for some reason. Like, leave the child alone, will ya? I asked the dark presence. F you and your dead grandma. Man, what is your beef with my grandma? Day 5. The demon is really starting to rear its ugly head. Like, every once in a while, Sarah's eyes will pop out of their sockets, and these disgusting, maggoty appendages will just come squirming out of them. Not sure what that's all about. Pretty weird. So I just kind of awkwardly push them back in with a pencil and place her eyes back gently. Day 6. Karen is fed up with me. Says that she'll call the police. Really, lady? The police? They don't have the best track record with stuff they don't understand, do they? Look, Karen, give it a day or 2 and I'll have this all sorted. My name's Melinda, and you better be telling the truth. Day 7. The demon is ripe for the popping. You can tell by the way that the veins swell with black fluid, and also by the manner with which it murders the mother Karen. I mean, Melinda. Man, I had to close my eyes, but the sounds alone was enough to make me upchuck my lunch. Wait on here? I asked the demon. The demon boomed, thank you for keeping the child alive whilst I grew. Anytime, let the big boss know, will ya? He said, your family remains safe from, mutter something in a language I don't really understand, but sounds something like, much appreciado, except for your grandma. Man.
Let's read a scary story. This one is titled, My 4-year-old daughter asked me why the hallway man doesn't blink. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage, where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a blanket and get cozy, because we're about to read a creepy story. My daughter is 4 years old. She's at that age where her imagination is wild, so when she asked me a weird question 3 nights ago, I didn't think much of it. We were sitting on the couch when she casually looked up and asked, "Daddy, why doesn't the hallway man blink?" I chuckled, looked around. We live in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment. "Sweetie," I said, "we don't have a hallway. It's just the living room and the kitchen." She didn't laugh back. She just pointed her little finger toward the blank drywall right beside the kitchen counter. The hallway behind the wall. Kids say creepy things all the time, so I just ignored it and put on cartoons to distract her. But the next night, she did it again. This time, I found her standing completely in the dark, staring directly at the exact spot on the wall. "Daddy," she whispered without looking at me. "He says you can't see it." A cold spike of unease hit my chest. "Who says that, Bug?" "The hallway man." I turned on every light in the place. I checked the entire apartment, banging on the drywall, looking for hidden panels, checking the landlord's old blueprints online. Nothing. It was just a solid wall separating our kitchen from the neighbor's unit. No hidden doors, no extra space, just a dead end. I thought that would be the end of it, but yesterday morning completely broke me. I walked out of my bedroom and found my daughter sitting cross-legged on the kitchen tile, talking to a blank wall. She was answering questions. She would say something, pause for a few seconds like she was listening, and then answer again. It looked like completely normal, fluid conversation. When I rushed over and asked who she was talking to, she looked annoyed at me for interrupting. "The hallway man," she huffed. "What does he want, sweetie?" She just shrugged her tiny shoulders. "He asks why you're still here." Needless to say, I couldn't sleep that night. I laid awake, tossing and turning until around 3 a.m. when I heard it. Footsteps. Not heavy boots, but slow, bare feet dragging across the floorboards. They weren't coming from outside the front door. They were coming from inside the kitchen. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept out. The living room was dead silent and completely empty. Then I noticed my daughter's bedroom door was wide open. She was standing right inside the doorway, wide awake, staring at the same wall. And for the first time, I saw it too. Thin, razor-sharp, dark line was running from the floor all the way to the ceiling. It looked exactly like a doorway, drawn into the drywall with a charcoal pencil. I don't even remember walking closer. I just remember the sheer hypnotic dread pulling me towards it. I swear the line wasn't there during the day. I would have noticed it. Before I could touch it, my daughter tugged hard on my sleeve. She looked genuinely terrified, her eyes welling up with tears. "Don't stand there, Daddy." "Why? What's wrong?" My voice shook. "Because he thinks you're the other one." My blood turned to pure ice. "What other one?" She looked at the wall, then up to me, and then back at the wall. She whispered, "The one that's trying to get back in." Right then, the charcoal line began to open, not swinging open like a regular door, but splitting apart like a wet crack in reality. Slowly, silently, a thin strip of absolute darkness peeled open, and my eyes adjusted to the shadows inside the crack. I saw my own apartment. It was the exact same layout, the same furniture, the same framed photo on the shelf. Everything was identical except someone was standing right in the middle of the room, staring back through the crack at me. It looked exactly like me, down to the shirt I was wearing. And then the version of me inside the wall smiled, a wide, unnatural, unblinking smile. My daughter started screaming and crying. I grabbed her in dead panic and threw her over my shoulder and bolted into the living room, slamming my bedroom door shut behind us. When morning came, I finally built up the courage to look. The wall was completely normal again. No line, no doorway, no crack, just painted drywall. I tried to convince myself I had a severe night terror, that it was just a hallucination brought on by stress. But tonight, about 20 minutes ago, I was putting my daughter to bed. She looked up at me from her pillows and asked a question that has me sitting in the dark, too terrified to move. She asked, "Daddy, if you're the real one, why does the hallway man keep calling you by the other name?" That gave me chills almost the entire time I was reading it. Let me know what you thought. And as always, if you have any scary stories of your own, just send me a DM.
I used to work security at a large office building, and one specific night around 2 a.m., I got an alert on the motion sensor trigger. It said that it was on the 7th floor, which should have been completely empty, but I went on the elevator and I took it up. There was no person, there was no activity, there was nothing happening on the 7th floor. There was no evidence that anybody was ever there. And then I got an alert on my radio from the dispatcher, and they said, "Did you find the person?" I just said, "No, I don't see anybody here." And they said, "That's really strange." So I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because it's not the motion sensor that triggered the alarm. It was literally like a badge detect, like somebody badged themselves into the door." So I went and I checked the system, and the card that was used was of a woman who hasn't worked here in years. She actually passed away in a car accident. The company never revoked her card because it was never found. So I assumed maybe somebody just found it and they were messing around. I decided to go check the camera footage, and the elevator door, it did open on the 7th floor. Nobody was in it, and it did close. Nobody came out of it. The badge had been used, the elevator traveled. I filed an incident report and I went home. A few days later, building management, they reviewed the security logs and they found something else. They discovered that the same badge had been used several times over the last couple of years. It was always after midnight, it was always on empty floors, and there's never a visible person on the camera. This part wasn't even the badge, it was the timing. It always happened after somebody had resigned, or they passed away, or they got let go. Management eventually just wiped all the badge information and they got new badges. But the tricky thing is, like a couple months after that happened, they were cleaning out the storage, and they found in one of the boxes the access badge that was used. Apparently, it was locked inside a locked electrical cabinet that has been opened in years. So the card couldn't have been used, at least physically, that is. And I feel like the oddest part about this whole story is the card, the lady's card, who it was, she passed away, and then about a year after she passed away is when it started to be used.
According to this woman who worked in an old clock shop deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the troll figurines that were inside of that store would move when people had insulted them. Now, this story was sent to me by a follower named Sissy, and honestly, this is probably one of those stories that becomes creepier the longer that you think about it, right? Not right up front, but the more you think about it, you're like, interesting. Now, according to her, she used to work at a tiny clock shop that was hidden inside of the Appalachians, and it's the kind of place that smelled like dust, old wood, and metal. Now, every wall was covered in clocks from the top to the bottom, hundreds of them. Some were modern, some so old she didn't even, she said it didn't even seem possible that they still worked at all, but that's that old craftsmanship. Anyway, at night, the sound of all those clocks ticking at the same time made the entire shop feel alive and like you were being watched. But according to Sissy, the strangest thing in the store wasn't the clocks at all. It was a tiny glass display case that was near the front of the store, and inside were dozens of hand-carved Norwegian troll figurines, and each one looked slightly different than the others. Some had long noses, others had twisted smiles, some had crooked eyes, and, expressions that really somehow looked human and inhuman all at the same time. Now, most customers absolutely hated them immediately. Some people would refuse to even walk near the case, and some would even refuse to look at them. But according to Sissy, the old shop owner once warned her about these troll figurines after she started working there. And he had told her that there was one rule that she should never break no matter what, and that is to never call the trolls ugly. And at first she laughed because she assumed that, maybe he was joking, but the owner looked at her completely serious, and then he explained something that was so disturbing to her. So according to old folklore, trolls weren't just decorative figurines, they were believed to be the watchers, ancient things tied to the land itself. And supposedly, if you treated them respectfully, they would bring you good luck and good fortune. But if you mock them, well, they would remember that. Now, Sissy didn't really believe in any of this at first, until one afternoon when she noticed one of the figurines had somehow turned around inside the display case. It didn't fall over, it didn't shift slightly, it completely turned. And it was facing a entirely different direction than what it had originally been earlier that morning, and she was the only one inside of the store. And she immediately had asked herself, herself and her coworker, did I move it, or hey, did you move it? But nobody had touched the case at all. And at first she was convinced that maybe she was imagining things, but then it happened again and again. And sometimes they'd open the store in the morning and several of the trolls would be positioned entirely different than the night before. And one time, 2 figurines were found leaned forward on one another, like one had been whispering something to the other one inside of their ear. And that's when the employees finally would check the security cameras, and they reviewed hours of footage expecting to catch somebody or their boss or one of the coworkers messing with the display case. But according to Sissy, the footage only made things even worse because the trolls never visibly moved on camera. One frame, they'd be sitting there one way facing one direction, and then in the next frame, not even a second later, they'd somehow be facing somewhere else or somewhere else entirely. No movement, no person touching them, just different. And that's when she started noticing another pattern. Whenever customers would laugh and mock the trolls or insult them, the atmosphere inside of that shop had immediately changed. People would point out that, point at them and joke and talk about how creepy or how ugly they looked. And every single time that would happen, the room would suddenly feel heavier and quiet, and like something was wrong or something wrong was going to happen. Like something unseen had started paying attention to them. And according to her, these customers almost always experienced bad luck immediately afterwards. One man mocked the figurines and slipped on ice outside of the store less than 10 minutes later. And another customer laughed at them, bought an antique clock, and returned it the next day, absolutely furious because every clock in his house had stopped at the exact same time that night. And strangely enough, none of those things ever happened to Sissy herself, because unlike everybody else, she actually liked the trolls. She treated them with respect, and she said that she never felt afraid of them. And, if anything, she felt protected by them. Whenever she would work alone, strange but good things would always happen to her constantly. Better sales, random tips, customers buying expensive items for no reason that she would make commission on. And she even claimed that during bad winter storms, her car somehow never struggled on the icy mountain roads while everybody else's vehicles were sliding all over the place and getting into accidents. And according to her, the old shop owner eventually told her something that still unsettles her after all these years. And he was telling her that, they know who respects them and who is a good person, genuinely a good person. And Sissy eventually left the job, but she says there's one thing that she still refuses to do to this day, and that is mock old figurines inside of an antique store, especially ones with faces, because according to her, there are some things that just don't sit there and listen. Some of them, they wait, and even sometimes they move when nobody is looking and they're watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Was a story that I heard. There was this girl named Jessica. Jessica said when she was younger, she grew up in Eastern Kentucky. And she said she liked to play outside in these woods that were right behind the house. She said one morning she was wandering around the woods. She was looking for rocks. She said that's when she looked over to her right, and she said there was another girl. She was standing near this tree. She said she had on kind of this tattered brown dress. She had dark skin, and her hairstyle looked kind of like weird. And she said, "Hi, hey, how are you?" And this little girl just took off running into the woods. And so she thought, I wonder who this girl is. Like, maybe I could be her friend. So the next day, she said she went into her kitchen, she got some snacks, and she got a drink. And she went into the backyard out in the woods where she'd seen this girl. And she set out some food and this drink. And so for the next couple of days, she would go out there, she would check, and there was the food, there was the drink, it was still out there. So she decided, I'm going to try something. I'm going to write a note too and say, hey, if you want to play, my name is Jessica, this is where I live. So she puts the note out with the food and the drink. The next day she comes back. The note, the food, and the drink are gone. So she's like, well, she must have gotten it. But several weeks passed and she never seen this girl again. So she said one day she's off riding her bike and she was a good distance away from her home. She said as she was riding her bike, she hears, "Who, who, who?" She said as she turned, there was that little girl. So she rode her bike over to her and she goes, "Hey, I'm Jessica. Like, do you want to play?" She said this little girl goes, "Hi, I'm Kiara." And she goes, "Well, do you want to play? Do you want to hang out?" And the little girl said, I have to be going now. And she took off running into the woods. So Jessica follows her. And she said she ended up in this part of the woods she'd never seen before. It was kind of like an open clearing. She said there was this kind of older cabin with this fence around it. She said she walked up and she said she sees Kiara. And she goes into this cabin. She said she got up to the fence and she was getting ready to go in when she hears her brothers yelling for him. So she turns and she goes back and she tells her brothers, like, "Hey, there's this girl and she lives out here in this cabin. Like, let's see if she wants to play." So they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll go out there." And so they go back to this cabin. Except when they go there, the cabin looks abandoned now. And it looks like no one lives there. They go inside, and this place is just completely empty. It's dusty. It's full of cobwebs. But there's no young girl there. There's no Kiara. And so the girl's like, I don't understand. Like, she went into this house. Like, it looked like she lived here. It looked like people lived here. There was smoke coming out of the chimney. And so her brothers are like, "Okay, whatever, you're just making this girl up." So she said, many years passed and she didn't know what to think of this girl, if she was real or if she wasn't real. But she said one day she was riding her bike again and she hears, "Who, who?" And she said that she sees Kiara again. So she stops and she goes, "Hey, Kiara, like, I've been looking all over for you. And all these years I've been wanting to meet you and, like, hang out." And she said that's when Kiara just turned and took off back into the woods. So she said she followed along. And she comes to this, like, piece of cloth on the ground. She said she picked up the piece of cloth and it looked like a part of her dress. And she said right at that moment she heard this crow going caw, caw, caw. And it just flew off into the sky. So she took this piece of cloth with her, and up until she was adult, she kept this piece of the dress. She said she told her boyfriend one day about this story. And he said, "Let's go back. Let's see if that cabin is still there." So she took her boyfriend back to where she used to live. And she said they searched the exact area where she'd seen this place, where she had seen Kiara. And she said they got to that open clearing, but there was no cabin there. She said, but the weirdest thing was there was a crow following them the whole time, like making these squawking noises. She said she felt like that was Kiara, whatever she was or whatever she might be. You have to understand that when you go into the Appalachian Mountains, you are entering into another realm. And there is a set of unspoken rules that you must follow. Rule number 1, if you hear something calling your name, right, you didn't. There is nothing there. And you should not respond. Do not say hello. Do not say, who is it? Just run away. Because something is trying to gain permission. And by you acknowledging it, you are allowing it to come after you. If you hear screams in the mountains, right, you didn't. And do not go towards the direction of the screams to try and help. because once again, something is trying to lure you. If you see people, you don't. If you hear crying, you're not hearing it. Do not respond to this at all because you are giving permission to whatever is in those woods to come after you. Now, if you are to go camping in the Appalachian Mountains, right, you have to remember, at night, you must keep a fire going at all times. And it's not for warmth, it's not for cooking, it's to keep you safe. And if you are going to camp in a tent, make sure when you go into that tent, it is sealed up. There are no holes, there are no cracks. And if you hear any kind of screaming, yelling, or anyone calling your name, do not respond. Do not go to sleep. And if something wakes you up, stay alert, and once again, do not respond. Now, it's very important when you are walking through the Appalachian Mountains, if you come across a deer carcass, do not touch it, do not stare at it, walk away, ignore it, because this is something, once again, trying to lure you into the woods. Now, if it comes to the point that something is chasing you, and it gets you, and there is no escape, fight. Fight as hard as you can, whether it's a person, an animal. If it's something else, though, and you know what I'm talking about, well, you just let it get you, right? Because at that point, there's nothing you can do. And there's an old saying, you go into the Appalachian Mountains with 2 bullets, right? You fire the first one at something that isn't a person, that isn't an animal. And if it doesn't run away, you know what to do with the second one. So this is kind of creepy. Now, have you ever been scrolling on your FYP? And as you're scrolling through your phone, for a brief second as you go between videos, do you ever notice a creepy face? Just for a brief second. Well, there are people who are saying that while they've been scrolling through their FYP, they see this really creepy looking face. It's just for a brief second, and it's just right before the video starts. And I'm curious if anybody else has ever experienced this. Now, this is a picture of, or a screenshot, I should say, of what people are saying that they're seeing on their FYP. So let me know, have you seen this man?
So what's the scariest thing that you've ever found out in the middle of the woods? Because I'm going to tell you something that me and my friends found out in the woods when I was about 18 years old. And I'm pretty sure that we accidentally stumbled across a completed crime scene, if you know what I mean. So like I said, me and my friends, we were about 18 years old, and we used to go hiking all the time out in the woods. I remember we pulled up to this one spot that you can tell that no one's been there for a while because the trail was all grown in. And I had already had a weird feeling in my gut that day, right? I was thinking to myself, like, something just doesn't seem right about today. You know those days like that? We park the car, we get out, and we walk. We start taking this trail we get about a mile into the woods at this point, stumble across this section of this trail that had a whole bunch of boulders that were piled on top of each other. And I remember thinking, oh man, this is cool. Let's hike to the top of this boulder pile. So we all start climbing this pile of boulders. And as we're climbing up to the top of this pile, you can tell that there is obvious blood swipe marks on some of these boulders. At the time, I didn't really think anything of it, right? I'm thinking, okay, maybe this was like an animal could have gotten hurt and climbed up this pile. It was until we got right to the top, and that's when you saw a clear handprint of blood at the top of this pile of boulders. It wasn't far after that handprint, it looked like the top of a foot, like the toes and the top of a foot print in blood at the top of this boulder, like somebody who was bleeding was climbing up to the top. We're looking at my friends like, yo, look at this. Like, what is this about? Obviously, we all thought it was kind of creepy, but we kind of just kept going because we were crazy like that. This is where shit starts getting weird. We get to the top of this boulder pile, and at the top of this pile, it was literally like, just like a flat area of trees and grass and stuff. It wasn't much of a view or anything, so climbing that was literally just for fun until we got to the top and saw what we saw. We didn't see any more handprints or footprints or anything, but we did see, tucked away in the back of this platform at the top, it looked like a literal steel or metal door, kind of like a storm basement door. Now, me being me, of course, I was like, oh my god, what is that? We all stand around it. We're all kind of timid about opening it, but at the same time, I was like, yo, I want to see what's inside this. So we opened it up, and I will never forget the look on our faces and the hair on the back of our neck standing up when we looked inside this door. Inside this door, like, it was just a hole, and there was literally a pair of shoes and an axe. This axe was literally laid on top of a bag. Now we're all looking at each other like, oh my god, what the hell is this? And we see these pair of shoes. The shoes didn't really have blood on them though, but there was a pair of shoes, there was an axe, and then there was this bag. So obviously I grabbed the bag and I open it, and inside of this bag was literal clothes. Grabbed this t-shirt that was all rolled up, and there was something hard inside of it. When I unrolled this t-shirt to see what was inside of it, it was a literal old VHS tape. Now, unfortunately, this tape was destroyed, like all the, the film was like pulled out of it, but there was a label on it that literally just said her. In case you're wondering, yes, we did put everything back in there, and then when we left, we ended up calling the police. Unfortunately, at that time, I never heard anything back from the police, but I can tell you this. I say in all my other videos, guys, there's only one thing scarier than animals out in the woods, and that's people.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I've always been sensitive to things that most people can't see. As strange as that may sound, this runs in my family. Several relatives claim to be mediums, and growing up, paranormal stories were just part of our normal conversation. So, throughout my life, there have been moments that simply don't have a logical explanation. A moment in my mom's house in particular still sticks with me. From the day we moved into that home, I hated it. The backyard had this old wooden shed that had been completely boarded shut. There was no way inside. There were no windows, and the door was nailed shut, old weathered planks nailed across every possible opening, and every time I looked at it, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like something was wrong about that shed, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Logically, it had something to do with the fact that it looked like it was keeping something inside from getting out. Eventually, I would just avoid looking at it whenever I could. The house itself wasn't any better. At the back was a large sunroom connected to the living room and kitchen. During the day, it was bright and full of toys, laughter, and play. A playroom of sorts for us 3 kids, but at night, it was the worst room in the entire house. One night, shortly after moving in, I couldn't sleep. It was the middle of the night, and the house was completely quiet and still, everyone else sleeping peacefully in their beds. I got up to grab a drink and wandered into the living room after noticing that the television had been left on. The TV screen casting blue flashes across the walls while everything else sat in darkness. I curled up in the corner of the couch with my drink, trying to relax and find some part of me that was tired. But even though I was the only one awake at that hour, I found myself feeling like the house felt crowded. Like people I couldn't see were standing all around me. The air felt different and heavy, and every instinct in my body was telling me that I shouldn't be there. And then I thought to myself that maybe that strange energy was the reason that I couldn't sleep. I tried ignoring it and focus on what was playing on the TV, but I noticed a new source of light in the home now. Out of nowhere, the light in the sunroom started flickering. Slowly at first, on and off, each flicker illuminating dozens of abandoned toys scattered across the floor, before throwing them back into darkness. I couldn't stop staring. The light then flickered several more times before just staying on. The room was completely still. After a few seconds, I convinced myself it was just an electrical issue, and turned back toward the television. But the low hum of what had been playing was now gone. Something had muted the television, and it hadn't been me. The silence suddenly felt overwhelming, and I found myself, slowly, looking back toward the sunroom. Among all the little toys was one of those old plastic toy telephones with the big cartoon eyes and the small red wheels underneath, with a string meant for toddlers to pull around the house. It was sitting right in the middle of the floor, almost spotlighted, and as I stared at it, it moved. Not something small either, not something that I could play off as being a trick of the eye. No, the toy rolled itself across the room, slowly, all the while keeping creepy eye contact with me with its big sticker eyes. I remember freezing so completely that I forgot to breathe. There wasn't anyone there. No child, no pet, not even a draft from an open window. Nothing that could have made that toy move the way it had. The little phone just kept rolling across the floor, as if someone invisible was dragging it around. Then another noise echoed through the room. Legos. Hundreds of tiny plastic bricks scraping across the floor like someone was digging through them with their hands. The sound was slow, methodical, and deliberate. Then another toy suddenly rattled somewhere deeper inside the room, and from where I was sitting, I couldn't actually see what was making the noise, but I knew something was moving in there. In that moment, I could feel something watching me from the darkness beyond the toys, and I knew I needed to leave. I stood up as calmly as I could and started walking back toward my bedroom. I didn't want to run. For some reason, I was terrified that if I ran, whatever was in that room would follow me. But even so, the entire walk back down the hallway, I had the overwhelming feeling that something was right behind me. I never turned around to look, though. I climbed into bed and pulled the blankets over my head, trying to convince myself I was imagining everything. The next morning, in an attempt to find some sort of explanation for what happened, I casually asked if anyone had gotten out of bed last night. Nobody had. Everyone had been asleep the entire night. I don't know what rolled that toy phone across the floor. I don't know what was moving around inside that sunroom. I don't know why I felt like there was a million people in that living room with me, when I was the only person that was actually there.
This has to be one of the scariest women to ever exist. All Mona Fandy had ever wanted was fame, so when her music career failed, naturally, she turned to witchcraft. Her and her husband were actually quite successful in this business and serviced many elite customers in Malaysia. And in July of 1993, a politician sought the help of Mona and her husband to boost his political career. So as instructed, he arrived at Mona's house around 10 p.m. and was brought to a room where this cleansing ritual would take place. During this ritual, the politician was told to lay face up, close his eyes, and picture money falling from the sky. And while he lays there with his eyes closed, picturing money falling from the sky, an axe does instead. Mona's assistant swings an axe 3 times before finally separating the politician's head from his body. He's then partially skinned and dismembered into 18 precise pieces. Now, after this has taken place, Mona steals the politician's money and goes on a shopping spree. She buys herself new luxury clothing, a brand new Mercedes-Benz, and a facelift. The politician, on the other hand, is reported missing after not showing up to important business meetings. And a little while later, Mona's assistant is stopped by police on totally unrelated charges, but comes clean to officers, telling them what they had done to this man. The assistant leads authorities to a shed on Mona's property where the politician's remains were buried, but they don't find all 18 pieces of him, leaving some to speculate that Mona and her husband ate them. Mona, her husband, and her assistant are all arrested and charged with murder, which carries an automatic death sentence in Malaysia. But that didn't bring her down. For every hearing, Mona showed up in bright, colorful clothing and always had this huge smile on her face. She even signed autographs for crowds gathering outside. She had finally gotten the fame she had always dreamed of. When she was sentenced to death, her response was, quote, "I'm happy with the decision. I want to thank all Malaysians. I love all the people." And just before she was hanged, her last words were, "I will never die."
Let's walk the old winding streets of Wickham in southern England. A historic location made infamous by the nearby Hellfire Caves, once occupied by the wealthy and elite of Wickham and the surrounding areas that would venture underground into the chalk caves to commit all kinds of devilry. Members had to cross the underground running stream named the River Styx as they stepped into the underworld to greet the devil himself, or so the stories go. But you're not even safe in Wickham above the caves, for the ghost of Suki, the murdered bride, is known to walk. Now, there are a few variations to this ghostly tale. However, the majority state she worked in the nearby George and Dragon pub and often used to decline the advances of local men. However, one evening a mysterious aristocrat turned up at the public house and caught Suki's attention. Three boys watching did not like this and hatched an evil plot. They sent a letter to Suki claiming to be the aristocrat, asking her to meet him in the caves after dark so the two could be secretly wed and run away together. But alas, it was total fiction. The three boys waited and greeted Suki in the caves. An argument ensued and they threw heavy rocks at her. Now some say she died within the caves, others say she managed to stumble back to the Georgian Dragon, where she collapsed at the bar and died. Either way, the Phantom Bride continues to haunt Wickham and is seen rather frequently. Suki has been seen in the caves and the streets of West Wickham themselves. Bloodied and battered, the ghostly bride walks along the cobbles, searching for the boys to seek revenge.
A musician sent me this story about his grandfather, and according to him, his grandfather spent the last years of his life absolutely convinced that he had met the same mysterious couple twice, nearly 50 years apart, and they hadn't aged a single day. So this is for entertainment purposes only, so enjoy. Now, this viewer, he explained that his grandfather was a blues and jazz guitarist who spent most of the 50s and the 60s traveling through Louisiana, Georgia, and South Carolina playing wherever people would pay him, right? Small clubs, private dinners, certain events, historic hotels, old plantation homes. And he wasn't famous or anything like that, but he was talented enough that wealthy people occasionally hired him to play at their intimate gatherings, we'll call them. Now, on this one night in the summer of 1959, he was invited to perform at a private dinner that was, it was this party that was right outside of Savannah. He said it was maybe 25 minutes away, and the estate itself was absolutely beautiful, but he said it felt strange, right? The house looked as if it had been frozen in time for years. There was no televisions, no modern artwork, no bright lights. Everything was illuminated by candles and chandeliers. Really, really old school. And according to him, the guest felt somewhat out of place, is how his grandfather described them. Their clothes looked really expensive, but very dated at the same time. Not costumes, I mean, maybe could have been, but just very older fashioned, worn, like they had gone out of style type of deal. Now, but among all the guests was this one couple that really stood out, and they appeared to be in their mid-30s. The man was of average build, clean shaven with dark hair that was slicked back, and the woman had pale skin like the man. She also had black hair, and it was resting just at her shoulders, but her eyes were strikingly gray. And throughout the evening, they barely ate, and they never touched the wine that had been poured for everybody. And, you know, whenever his grandfather looked up while playing, he noticed that they were watching him very intently. Not in like an uncomfortable way, more like they were enjoying him, right? They were mesmerized by his talent. And after his final song, the couple had approached him. And the woman, she complimented his playing and his talents, and, you know, she told him that she hadn't heard blues performed like that in decades. And the grandfather just kind of laughed it off, and he's like, well, you know, that's because blues changes every year, right? Music does. And she smiled, and she politely replied, and she's like, you know, some things shouldn't change. And the man had asked him, you know, if he ever worried about growing old and losing his ability to play and being forgotten about. And his grandfather joked and, you know, said that musicians get old all the time, and that's just how life is. Now, the woman, she tilted her head in like almost like a confused way, as if like aging itself was something that she'd only read about, right? Like it was foreign to her. And before they left, the man handed him a small silver lighter that was engraved with roses. And he thanked them, and he never thought much about it again. Now, of course, life moved on. He married, had children, had grandchildren, lost some friends, watched entire neighborhoods change over time, and he stopped touring. And eventually he retired, right? Well, then now in 2008, nearly 50 years later, his son convinced him to attend a jazz festival in Charleston. And during a break between performances, he stepped into a small wine bar that was nearby, and sitting near a window overlooking the street was that same couple, exactly the same way that he saw them nearly 50 years ago. Same dark hair, same gray eyes, same pale skin, and that same elegant clothing. You know, not older older, not heavier. They didn't look wrinkled, nothing. They looked the exact same. And at first he assumed, he was mistaken until the woman looked up and she smiled at him. And she's like, hey, I was hoping that we'd get to hear you play again someday. And he felt his stomach drop because it confirmed what he was already thinking. And he recognized her voice and he knew that it was her. And the man that was with her, he stood up and he shook his hand, it was firm and cold. And just as he remembered from the first time. And his grandfather finally asked the question that he'd been thinking. He's like, how old are you people? And the woman, she just laughed and then looked toward the stage where musicians were beginning to play again. And she just simply said, we're old enough to know that good music survives everything. Wars, floods, cities, families, people. But music has a way of refusing to die. And I firmly agree with that, side note. But anyway, a friend of the old man called out for him, and he ended up excusing himself, and he got up and went and spoke. And about 2 minutes later, when he went to go back to the couple, they were gone. There was no sign of them at all. And after that, he had spent years trying to explain what had happened. And maybe they were descendants, maybe they were siblings, maybe, his memory wasn't as good as he thought it was. But according to the grandson, until the day that he died, his grandfather kept that silver lighter with him almost at all times. And he began to call it like his good luck charm. And every once in a while, he'd hold it in his hands and kind of just like smile to himself, and he'd say to the family, I don't know if they were vampires or what, but whatever they were, they certainly weren't living life the same way that the rest of us were. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Was this just entertainment that was sent to me? Is this the memory of an old man or a real life case of the movie Sinners with Stack and the girl at the end of the movie?
Let's read a scary pizza delivery story. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a blanket and get cozy because we're about to read a creepy story. I used to deliver pizzas on the weekends when I was in college. The town I worked in is very old and very haunted. One night, I took an order to a street that has a railroad that runs parallel with it, and in between the street and the railroad is a drainage ditch. Just before I turned into the driveway, which was on the right, something catches my eye on the left. I turn my head and catch a glimpse of a dark figure crouched down in the drainage ditch, peering from behind some weeds. For a good 3 seconds, I look at this figure before my subconscious forced me to look back at the road so I didn't wreck. As I walked up to the house, I kept an eye out in that direction because my first thought was that I was about to be robbed. As I knocked on the door, I was standing sideways to avoid being snuck up on. I kept going back and forth thinking whether it was a person or a spirit. The customer eventually opened the door and I gave them their stuff. Walking back to my car, again, I kept an eye out in that direction. Once I was safely inside my car with the doors locked, I could relax. I backed out of the driveway and made my way back to the store. When I passed by that spot, the figure was gone. I wondered how they could have moved without me hearing their feet crunch on the gravel. Maybe they were laying down and I couldn't see them. Why were they solid black even though there was a street light nearby? Given the history of this town and the fact that those tracks are probably 200 years old, and the fact that in this town there has been very little crime, especially robbery, it wouldn't surprise me if it was a spirit. This story is 100% true.
Hi Daisy, my name is Monica. I just recently started listening to you, and my 9-year-old daughter Emma just started listening too. She says hi, by the way. She's been insisting that I email you my stories, so here we are. Hi Monica, hi Emma, thank you both for listening to the stories. It's all thanks to you guys, seriously. So thank you Emma for encouraging your mother. Now we get to hear more stories from viewers like you. I sound like PBS. From viewers like you, thank you. No, seriously, thank you both so much. I can't wait to share your stories. So let's go on. Now, about my stories. In 2006, we had just moved into a brand new home, and my baby sister and I shared a room. One night, I woke up feeling cold and noticed that the cobija, the blanket, had slipped down to my feet. Así que me levanté y me volví a cobijar. So I got up and covered myself again. Seconds later, the blanket was yanked off of me. I asked my sister, "Sis, was that you?" But she did not respond. So I got up again and pulled the blanket back over me. No pues, otra vez, alguien me volvió a quitar la cobija. Well, again, someone pulled the blanket off of me. I stood up and shook my sister, asking if she was awake, but she was sound asleep. She made a small movement, but didn't wake up. So I pulled the blanket back on, and once again, it was yanked down to my legs. This time, though, I felt something moist, like someone was breathing between my ear and neck. Keeping my eyes closed, I pulled the cobija up to my chin. I don't remember how long it took me to fall back asleep after that. Another encounter happened after I graduated from high school and had a day off. I had the whole house to myself since my family was either at work or school. I was in the living room watching TV when all of a sudden, I heard kids laughing, like they were running around behind the sofa and down the hallway. I wasn't scared. I was surprisingly okay with it. Between the time we moved in and when I graduated, we had inquilinos, tenants, who rented out the master bedroom. When they first came to see the room, my parents introduced us. The man asked if there were any more kids in the house. And my parents said no. That's when he mentioned, "No tengan miedo, pero hay dos pequeños más en esta casa. La verdad, no son malos. Don't be afraid, but there are two little ones here. They're not bad, honestly." This next story is from my sister-in-law, and it happened years later. One morning while we were getting breakfast ready, she asked if the house was haunted. My mom asked why, and she told us that she had woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of the office chair spinning. She saw a little boy using the chair, and when it stopped spinning, the boy was facing her. I don't remember all the details, but this encounter happened in the same room where my cobija was pulled off of me. I eventually told my mom about the blanket incident, and she said that maybe the ghost was trying to lead me to gold or money. She also told me, "Nunca le tengas miedo a los muertos, sino a los vivos." Never be afraid of the dead, only the living. My last spooky story I would like to share is about an experience my parents had with La Llorona. While they were in Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico, they ended up sleeping at one of my dad's sister's homes. My mom told me that she and my dad couldn't sleep and were staying up talking when all of a sudden they heard someone weeping. The sound was so loud and horrific that it felt like it was right next to them. In the end, they slept with the lights on. It's worth noting that my aunt's home was near a river, and supposedly, where there's a river nearby, you're more likely to hear La Llorona. With tons of love, your new YouTube subscribers, Emma and Monica.
While staying alone at a hotel, something sat on my bed as I slept. Scary story time. Last night I stayed at an airport hotel as I had a very early flight this morning. I was alone in my room and started trying to fall asleep around 9:30 p.m. I tossed and turned most of the night as I typically am quite restless the night before travel. Sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. I was lying on my side in a light sleep when I went to move my legs and felt something solid in the crevice between my calves and the back of my thighs, on top of the covers. As soon as I felt the mass, a dark energy began vibrating through my entire body. My heart rate spiked, I froze, fearing that moving would cause whatever it was to realize I was awake. I considered telling whatever it was in my room that it wasn't welcome and to please leave, but I decided to wait a bit longer. Then I felt it begin to breathe. I could feel the mass inhaling and exhaling deeply, like you would if a dog was curled up sleeping in the crook of your legs. The whole experience was probably 60 seconds long, but it felt like forever. As I came more out of the haze of being half awake, the sensation left. There was nothing on the bed, the door was locked and deadbolted. I'm writing this story as I sit on my flight as I wanted to get it down before I forget. Probably the strangest part of all this is that earlier in the evening, I had been in my grandpa's wake. Maybe something followed me back from the funeral home. And that's the end of the story. So this story was found on the Paranormal Encounter subreddit, and I did want to read 2 comments that 2 people left. The first comment was someone sharing their own story of sleep paralysis, and they go on to say, "People are saying sleep paralysis, but I say sleep paralysis is just being haunted in your sleep. Not a dream. I've only ever had it once, the day my dog died. It was like 3:30 in the morning, and I woke up to find her next to my bed, growling at me in a fog of green smoke with glowing white eyes. She was so angry. I couldn't move or scream for help for 5 minutes while I endured this. When I woke up, I went to my mom, and before I said anything at all, she started telling me about how she never had sleep paralysis. But last night at around 3:35, the dog came to her and growled in a fog of green smoke with glowing white eyes. So when she found out it happened to me, we were both way more terrified. And now I fully believe what happens during sleep paralysis is 100% real. The dog had been blind, and a neighbor child had apparently let her slip out of the door, and she got lost in the neighborhood and got into a fight with some strays and died as a result. This was 2 weeks after I rescued another dog who was being abused. I think she also felt replaced and angry because she didn't quite understand, and it broke my heart. That's so sad. The second comment, I think, is more of just an interesting commentary that they left, talking about sleep paralysis and more of like their viewpoint, what they think. So this commenter goes on to say very shortly, it seems we're learning our subconscious creates these events from the fears that we are projecting without awareness, or that these dimensions aren't accessible to us except during periods of sleep paralysis, half awake, under the influence, or during deep meditation. So that one was kind of interesting. I feel like it kind of shows that maybe there are different levels to sleep paralysis, and it's not maybe just something that's straightforward. So what do you think? Have you ever experienced sleep paralysis? What was your scariest experience? I've had a few, but I'll save those stories for a different time. But let me know, what do you think? What were your experiences? I would like to know.
A series of spooky stories, except for it's the most unhygienic thing that you've ever seen anyone do. Buckle up, because this is terrifying. He vaped and specifically got mint flavor so he didn't have to brush his teeth. X refused to even touch his own butt/mutt hole to wash himself in the shower. Would wipe halfway and have pieces of TP stuck in there. Imagine my surprise when he orders a giant toy to my house and asks me to peg him. Oh my God. He was taking a poop with the door open, and I was standing there talking to him, and when he stood up, he pulled up his pants without wiping. I said, "Hey, you didn't wipe." He said, "I'm not done yet," and just walked off to do whatever. I'm done. He'd been using the same towel unwashed for 2 years. He said it was clean because he only used it to get out of the shower. It literally had mold on it. He'd put on deodorant every 72 hours because the stick said good for up to 72 hours. I mean, purposely not washing under his arms in the shower because he didn't want the deodorant to wash away. He pissed in the bed, and instead of washing the sheets, he got up and hung it to air dry. Family loofah. Oh. Jessica, the original creator of this post, my husband was using mine without me knowing. Dude once said, "Oh, you're using that to scrub your face? I use it to scrub my ass." I was never the same since then, and I would have smacked the shit out of him. He threw up into a napkin at the table, set it aside, and kept eating. I had a guy tell me that he has black sheets because his hemorrhoid was so bad, he'd have his finger knuckle deep up his ass at night, itching. Seek medical attention. He was sleeping bare, no sheet, dorm mattress, and had a blanket that reeked of cigs, and he didn't smoke. Asked what it was from, and he said that he got it at Goodwill and hadn't washed it yet. I almost threw up. Not my relationship, but my friend said her husband eats his contacts every night. What the actual fuck is wrong with you? That man needs a psychiatrist. And you're just sitting there watching him eat, just chomp on the things that he just pulled out of his fucking eyeballs. My parents, when cooking meat, will put the now cooked meat back onto the original packaging before plating it. I now know why I never felt good growing up. They still do that, and I refuse to eat at their house ever. Is that not attempted murder? He peed in a water bottle in bed, 5 steps from the bathroom. I never cussed so good in my life. I have seen far too many of these comments. He told me it was normal for his entire family to share toothbrushes. This is what I mean. He kept a piss cup, a big one that he took from Chili's, at his bedstand at night and only dumped it once a week and then put it in the dishwasher when he did clean it. Oh my God. It's a fucking biohazard up in this bitch. He finished lying on his back, and it hit the window behind his head. When I came over 2 weeks later, it was still there, dried on the window. My ex pissed the bed and went to go to sleep on the couch, leaving me in the bed. I went home the next morning, and he didn't wash the sheets until I came back a week later. Why did you go back after he left you in that pissy bed? He left poop flakes on the bed sheets. I'm gonna throw up. I'm going to puke. My ex used a blanket as a curtain. You know, nothing unusual, I guess. Until you looked closer. He would use it to finish on and told me that he used it for years and never washed it. Fresh and old human was on it. Some so old it turned yellow. Oh my god. His mom knew and she didn't care. Both of them need jail time. My ex-boyfriend had a booger wall. The amount of booger wall comments should be fucking studied. I'm holding it in. Reusing Q-tips and floss for weeks. And yes, the Q-tips would have wax. And he kept using... Oh my god. He kept using them every day and then left them out on his counter. My roommate used the sponge we used to clean the bathroom to wipe herself after doing her business. She used it while I was away for a month because I was not there to buy toilet paper. Oh my god. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think I can do a part 2. I don't think I...
Let me know what you think.
Might have known the story of real life boogeyman.
The CCTV of this killer is some of the most chilling footage I've ever seen, and it's even worse because they were never caught. It was a rainy morning on the 18th of April 2016 in Texas. Missy Bevers was a mum of 3, but she was a real superwoman because not only was she ferrying 3 kids around constantly, she was also a working mum. She was a fitness instructor and she was like a total badass. She was doing these like gladiator boot camps for her clients. And the night before this particular session, she actually wrote on Facebook, "If it's raining, we're still training." Like, she was dedicated. And sure enough, it was chucking it down the next day as it was forecast, but she arrived to the training location bright and early. It was actually a church where she parked up. It was the Creekside Church of Christ, and she had a class scheduled for around 5 a.m. that morning, so she actually had to get there at 4, which sounds like a total nightmare to me, but fair play to her. When her clients arrived, there was just an eerie silence, and then they started to scream. Missy was lying dead in a pool of blood. So the church where they were holding this workout class was only actually 20 minutes from Missy's house. And none of this seemed to make sense because she was a really well-liked woman in the area. She didn't have any known enemies. She was so lovely, and it's like, well, why would somebody do this? As luck would have it, there was actually CCTV in the church, and really shockingly, it was working. I feel like in these crime cases, CCTV is never working. Missy had just been casually unloading her car at 4 a.m. about to go inside and shelter from the rain. Little did she know this figure was already in the building. It sends chills down my spine. She had no idea the mystery figure was already stalking the corridors. Dressed head to toe in police gear and a balaclava, the mystery figure entered the frame just 10 minutes before Missy arrived. They were wearing a helmet and gloves, and the only real identifying factor was that their right foot turned outward as they walked, and they had a little bit of a limp. Police guessed from the footage that this person was roughly between 5'2" and 5'8". The murder itself wasn't caught on camera, but this was clearly a crime of passion. She'd been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. Police obviously first looked at the husband. They usually do that, right? But her husband, Brandon, had actually got an alibi. He was over 600 miles away on a fishing trip. And they even double checked this. They were like, okay, well, give us your phone. They checked his phone. Everything was absolutely fine. And they also checked the GPS data, and he'd never been anywhere near that church. But when police checked Missy's social media, they found she had been having a bit of a flirty relationship with a guy on LinkedIn. I feel like that's the first time I've ever heard of like flirty messages on the app, but rumors have gone round that maybe his partner had found out and this was some sort of revenge killing. Word on the street was that this guy's partner had also recently had knee surgery. Then on April the 22nd, 4 days after the murder, Missy's father-in-law Randy did something very strange that raised so many eyebrows. He took a woman's top to the dry cleaner, and when the dry cleaner looked at the top, it was covered in blood. Now, he explained that this had come from a dog after somebody carried it to the vets after being in some sort of dog fight. Everybody was like, right, unlikely story. Like, this just doesn't make sense. And even police were thinking that too. So they had the top tested. But sure enough, turns out it was really dog blood. He also just so happened to have been in California during the murder too, so he couldn't have done it. Then another suspect emerged. Now, a former tactical police officer, Bobby Wayne Henry, had a car that seemed to match a dark SUV that was leaving the crime scene. He also had access to the same riot gear that was used in this killing. He also walked with a limp and also had a history of violence towards women. He'd got an aggravated assault charge from 1996. So this isn't looking good, right? I mean, we're pretty sure we've got the guy. And this all takes a really, really dark turn because police got a search warrant to search his house, and although they didn't find anything relating to Missy, they did find disgusting images of children he had on his computer. Like, this is a former police officer. Now, I can't actually find what happened to him regarding this charge. I'm really hoping he did some kind of prison time, but police eventually ruled him out in Missy's case because they said that he was too tall to have done this. But people obviously argue that, like, CCTV isn't always totally accurate. Like, sometimes the visuals can be warped slightly and it can make you look a little bit smaller than you actually are. Killingly, the killer is still out there and Missy's family have never had justice. For more cases like this, check out The Bourne Investigation. I post a brand new episode on my podcast every single week.
Story time for you guys. I'm gonna start off by saying this is a dream, right? We're just gonna say that this altercation I had was a dream. At this point, I want to say I was like 9 when this situation occurred. It was one night that I was playing, but like I was playing in between my room and running back and forth in the kitchen towards the dining room, just going back and forth playing. I don't really know what specifically I was doing, but it was late at night. It was late at night for me at this time because I had a curfew, but I was asleep because there was no school at this time. It was like 10:30 going on to 11. All the grown-ups in the house were awake. It was my mom, my dad, my aunts, my uncles, my older cousins. They were all drinking and playing like pool and stuff like that. They would be playing that type of stuff like in the basement, but like for all the people that didn't want to play pool in the basement, they would be playing like card games upstairs in the dining room. So I believe I was playing by myself at this time. Like I said, I'm going back and forth between the dining room and my and my room. And while I'm playing and stuff, this was like before I had an AC in my window. So like my window was way more clear to see the backyard. So I run into my room and for some reason something just made me want to look out the window. So I look out the window. Like I said, it's late at night, it's dark outside. There's no like lights in the backyard. So the only light that I seen was something that looked like, I don't want to say a spaceship, but I'm going to just say like a UFO. It looked like it was a UFO literally in the flat out center middle of like my backyard. It was like soon as I locked eyes onto it through the window, it literally gravitated and went up. And that's when I seen all the lights. But like literally like the lights, like it was like the thing was spinning in a circle and all the lights were spinning in a circle. It literally took off flying like so quick, like I couldn't even like say anything or yell my mom or dad's name. I couldn't do any of that because the UFO, it flied away too quick. And after that, I literally froze there for like a good 20 to 30 seconds just looking in the backyard, trying to see if I'll see it fly back in this area or not. I was just really thinking like, what the fuck? Like, I ain't ever seen no shit like that before this, let alone I never seen no shit like this again after this. I was at the point in my life where I did start believing and doing more research on like extraterrestrials and aliens and stuff like that, which I still do believe that aliens are, you know, here on this earth with us. But like that was like my first ever encounter that I had with a UFO basically. I told my mom about it, but like I was so scared I didn't tell her or my dad about it that same night. I waited like I want to say a couple years before I told them that story time. And like I said, we're just gonna say it was a dream because now I'm sounding crazy as heck telling this story time right now.
yeah, that's pretty much it for the story time. Let me know your opinions based on extraterrestrials and aliens and things of that sort. And make sure you guys follow me for more story times.